Kenya has just concluded its general election and Angolans are set to go to the polls this coming week. Now, one issue that comes up time and time again in African politics is women's participation and the challenges that female politicians face when trying to run for public office. According to the Kenya Women Parliamentary Association, dozens of female candidates got physically assaulted during campaigning for presidential, legislative and local elections in their country. Well, Malawi was no different, as regional correspondent for Oxford Human Rights Hub, Mwai Daka, found out. I spoke to him a little earlier about gender issues during elections. Regional correspondent of Oxford Human Rights Hub, Mwai Daka, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, you've written a number of articles, but one that grabbed my attention is the study you did on gender and the electoral process in Malawi. And I suspect that this is something that resonates with other parts of the continent as well. First of all, tell me what inspired you to investigate this. What had you seen?
So essentially what it was is I came across some articles, and I noticed a lot of research in this area sort of ignores the fact that a lot of women actually during major protests and elections face violence, and this violence can stem from a lot of different places. So based on this, I decided to look into Malawi, where women faced violence from the police officers. So this violence wasn't coming from other protesters. It was actually violence instigated by police officers. So that's what really inspired this piece. And looking at statistics, that have been done in this area, they also show that a lot of women face, violence within Parliament across Africa. And based on this, I decided to sort of go ahead and investigate this a bit further.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what you found in Malawi in particular. What kind of violence were women facing? And let's start with outside Parliament, because I'd like to talk about Parliament separately. You mentioned the police. What kind of violence were women facing?
So the type of violence that they faced would be things like rape or, physical violence. And this was in the wake of the, major protests that came from the nullified election. So this is when Peter Mutharika was, running against Lazarus Chakwera. So immediately after this, when the election was nullified by the, courts, people took to the streets to protest. And essentially what happened is police were then deployed to try and, quell the situation. But what essentially happened is that upon the death of a police officer, in a way, police retaliated or, took heavy-handed approaches to trying to get people to calm down. And unfortunately, what happened in this situation is that women faced, gender-based violence at the hands of police officers. So, some women are alleged being raped, and some of them were, sexually harassed. And this went on for a very long time. And the issue here is that whilst all this was going on, the perpetrators of this, rape and gender-based violence in Malawi have not been brought to account yet. So that in itself presents a major issue because, women lose credibility in the system that's been put in place in Malawi to protect them from, this violence.
What do you think is happening in society that leaves women struggling to get their voices heard, particularly during election periods?
So I think quite a few things are happening. So, for example, if you take, Malawi, you could say that the infrastructure or the system that's been put in place isn't very accommodating to women. So, for example, if you look at the election, that took place and the major protests that took place in Malawi, you could argue that, in fact, the system that's been put in place to protect, ordinary citizens does have a bias towards women. So, for example, when you have a protest, women are more likely to face violence at the hands of police officers, so male police officers, whilst the contrary wouldn't happen. So male protesters would face violence, but it wouldn't be the kind that you would expect women to face. So in a way, it's sort of this culture of impunity that's been, being built up and been brewing for such a long time, and not much has been done to sort of, prevent it from happening or to continue from happening in Malawi.
I hate to always bring this up, but is it partly a cultural thing where we're very patriarchal societies across the continent, and men hitting women generally is sadly not uncommon? Could this be something that goes through to the authorities, so when they're dealing with women?
To an extent, yes, it could be a cultural thing, but at the same time, I also think, it's a lack of whereby you have, trained officers who are well equipped and understand that, women do have rights, equal rights, just as men do. And, they have a duty to respect that. So whilst it might be seen as a cultural problem, it also comes down to training. So if you have police officers well trained and understand that, women have equal rights to men, then this really shouldn't be a situation.
Let's talk about Parliament now, because you also observed harassment of female MPs. Who's been harassing them inside Parliament?
So if you look at harassment in Parliament, you find that 49% of cases reported of sexual harassment actually, instigated by members of, political parties. So, for example, you can have members from the opposition parties, males, instigating violence against other members of Parliament, who might be in government or might be in opposition. And the other sort of really worrying thing is that you will find that, these cases of, sexual harassment within Parliament also stem within political parties, whereby male colleagues within the same party as these women are instigating violence against them. So really, it comes down to, party leaders actually making sure that the members are respecting, each other and respecting women's rights whilst they're in Parliament and within their political parties whilst they're campaigning. Because at the moment, it seems like there isn't much being done to, I suppose, accommodate women in a climate that's already hostile to them. And, more needs to be done about it.
I find it really difficult to believe that parliamentarians, elected officials, and could behave so badly with fellow colleagues. Tell me, beyond violence, is sometimes the language and the behavior inside Parliament also derogatory to female colleagues?
In most cases, it tends to be, yeah. So with the language itself, I mean, if you look at the makeup of parliament, say for example, Malawi, it only has 44 members who are women in parliament, as compared to, I believe it's 140, let me have a look, I think I wrote it down somewhere, 144, 48, sorry, 148 women. If you look at Zambia, so the newly elected, government, so Hakainde Hichilema's government, we only have approximately 25 women in parliament as opposed to 141 men in parliament. And also we have Angola that's going to be having an election soon. So with Angola, we have, approximately 65 women, elected into parliament against 155 men. And if you look at Angola, for example, the large percent, so 60% of the population is under 24 years old. So if you look at the language that parliamentarians are using and it's sort of not really empowering women, it kind of creates an environment whereby it's okay for male parliamentarians to do certain things that are not acceptable. And this in itself creates a problem. So for example, if you look at Malawi, if you have the Inspector General or the members of the National Assembly not really accommodating access to justice for women who have been, suffering injustices at the hand of the, Malawi police, then that in itself translates to say, it's okay for this to happen. And we're not really going to hold the people accountable. We're not going to do anything about it. And which in turn tends to, people taking it as, if the government isn't going to protect my rights as a woman, am I safe? Am I okay to go out on the streets and actually participate in politics? The alternative could be that, women choose to go and participate online. So this removes the immediate threat of physical violence that you might face on the streets. But then again, this introduced another, dimension to it. So you face violence online. So really what needs to be happening is that the derogatory language that's used, in parliament should be something that we look at it seriously and really consider, getting rid of it so that women feel more safe, creating these safe places for women to participate in politics.
So what needs to be done? What needs to change, do you think, to make women's voices safe and loud during election periods across the continent?
So personally, what I think is that, a lot of male members of parliament, or maybe males who are in authority figures, a lot of them profess to being committed to gender equality and women's rights. But essentially what happens is, they'll profess, we want equality for women, we want this and that. But once they get elected, not much is done about it. So really what needs to be done is we need to be holding these people to account and actually implementing the change that they're suggesting they will implement. And I feel personally, this is a way forward to actually strengthen women's voices in parliament and outside of parliament. And also putting in place, structures that are actually geared towards acknowledging and, recognizing women's rights when they take part in politics, as opposed to accommodating only male figures in politics. So personally, I feel this is the way forward. And also ensuring that, police officers are trained to such an extent that they carry out their duties without, having a negative impact on ordinary citizens, women who are trying to take part in politics. So that would be a way forward.
Mwai Daka, Regional Correspondent, Oxford Human Rights Hub. Thanks very, very much indeed for joining us. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.